The creation of napalm traces back to the urgent need for more effective incendiary weapons during World War II. As warfare increasingly involved urban areas and dense jungles, the limitations of conventional explosives became apparent. Bombs were effective for demolition but had limited impact on well-fortified positions or forested areas where enemy forces could easily hide. The US military, eager to gain an advantage, turned to scientists for a new solution, one that could obliterate enemy positions and deny safe havens in difficult terrains. The result was the development of napalm, a substance whose legacy would shape modern warfare in both terrifying and effective ways. In 1942, the research team led by Louis Fieser, a chemist from Harvard University, began experimenting with ways to enhance gasoline's combustibility. The idea was to create a fire-based weapon that could stick to targets, burn longer, and be easier to deploy. Fieser's team discovered that by adding naphthenic and palmitic acids to gasoline, they could produce a thick, jelly-like substance that clung to surfaces. This new gel-based incendiary material became known as napalm, derived from the words naphthenic and palmitic, the two key ingredients in the formula. Its ability to burn fiercely and adhere to surfaces, including skin, made it a powerful tool for clearing enemy positions and devastating infrastructure. Napalm's first major battlefield test came in the Pacific Theater during World War II. The US military faced the challenge of uprooting entrenched Japanese forces, who had built formidable defenses in dense tropical jungles. Traditional bombs were less effective in these environments, as the dense foliage and underground tunnels provided ample protection for the enemy. However, napalm changed the game. When dropped, the gel-like substance spread over the jungle, igniting everything in its path. It could penetrate trenches, caves, and bunkers, turning once safe hideouts into death traps. Napalm bombs effectively cleared large areas, exposing enemy troops to subsequent airstrikes and ground assaults. The devastating effects of napalm were quickly recognized. Not only did it destroy enemy fortifications and foliage, but it also had a profound psychological impact on those who witnessed it. Soldiers who faced napalm described the sheer terror of its flames, which burned at temperatures of over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 815 degrees Celsius. The fire could consume anything it touched: trees, buildings, and human beings. Victims caught in a napalm strike experienced horrific burns, as the sticky gel adhered to their skin, making it nearly impossible to extinguish the flames. Though napalm proved to be a highly effective weapon, its use also raised moral questions from the beginning. Early reports of civilian casualties and the weapon's indiscriminate nature started to generate concern, even within the military. The firebombing of Tokyo in March 1945, where napalm was used extensively, resulted in the deaths of over 100,000 people, many of them civilians. These early instances foreshadowed the intense debates that would later surround the use of napalm in future conflicts, particularly in Vietnam. Despite these concerns, napalm quickly became a staple in the US military's arsenal. Its role in major campaigns, such as the invasion of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, solidified its status as a game-changing weapon. The ability to control terrain by firebombing key areas and denying enemy cover made napalm an essential tool for the remainder of World War II. After the war, the military continued to refine and expand its use of incendiary weapons, recognizing napalm's strategic value. In the years that followed, the military's success with napalm during World War II would lay the groundwork for its deployment in conflicts around the world. However, the haunting images of napalm's destruction in Japan, and later in Vietnam, would also serve as stark reminders of the devastating human cost of such weapons. As napalm moved from its scientific origins to the battlefield, its dual identity as both a tactical innovation and a symbol of unchecked destruction began to take shape. The invention of napalm marked a turning point in military history. From the moment it was first deployed, its effectiveness as a fire-based weapon was undeniable, but so too were the ethical dilemmas it posed. The horrifying scenes of napalm's devastation left a lasting legacy, one that would shape how the world viewed the use of incendiary weapons for decades to come. Napalm's dark legacy truly solidified during the Vietnam War, where it became one of the most controversial and infamous weapons used by the US military. In the dense jungles of Vietnam, the US faced a persistent and resourceful enemy, the Viet Cong, who used guerrilla tactics to evade direct confrontation. Traditional bombing methods, while powerful, often failed to penetrate the thick canopy and underground tunnels that the Viet Cong used to move undetected. In response, the US military turned to napalm, which could obliterate these jungle hideouts, burn through vegetation, and expose enemy troops. However, the use of napalm did not come without significant consequences, both for those on the ground and for the global perception of the war. Napalm bombs, dropped from American planes, unleashed a torrent of fiery destruction that was impossible to contain. The thick, sticky gel created walls of flame that clung to anything in its path: trees, buildings, and tragically, people. As the bombs ignited upon impact, the fire spread rapidly, consuming entire swaths of jungle and village. The strategic goal was clear: to deny the enemy their natural cover and weaken their ability to launch surprise attacks. But in reality, napalm often caused indiscriminate destruction. Civilians, caught in the crossfire of this brutal strategy, bore much of the weapon's horrifying consequences. Entire villages were burned to the ground, and many innocent lives were lost in the flames. One of the most iconic and heart-wrenching symbols of napalm's use in Vietnam was the photograph of Phan Thi Kim Phuc, a young Vietnamese girl who was severely burned by napalm in 1972. The image, which shows her running naked down a road after tearing off her burning clothes, became an emblem of the suffering caused by the war. This single photograph, taken by journalist Nick Ut, brought the brutality of napalm into homes around the world, triggering widespread outrage. The photo became a rallying cry for the anti-war movement, highlighting the immense human cost of the Vietnam conflict and questioning the ethical use of such a destructive weapon. Kim Phuc's story resonated deeply because it was not just about her personal suffering, but about the countless others who were caught in similar attacks. The burns caused by napalm were uniquely devastating. The gel, once ignited, adhered to the skin, making it nearly impossible to extinguish without causing more severe damage. Victims who survived napalm strikes were left with life-altering injuries, massive third-degree burns, disfigurement, and excruciating pain. The medical facilities in war-torn areas were often ill-equipped to treat such injuries, resulting in further suffering and loss of life. The strategic use of napalm was also coupled with psychological warfare. The sight and sound of napalm strikes, the billowing fire, and the thick black smoke it produced had a terrifying effect on both the enemy and the civilian population. The US military recognized this, using napalm not just as a tool of destruction but as a way to break the will of the Viet Cong and demoralize those who supported them. Yet this approach had severe unintended consequences. Rather than simply weakening the enemy, the widespread use of napalm turned much of the civilian population against the US military. Villagers who had once been neutral or undecided began to view American forces as oppressors, compounding the difficulties of winning hearts and minds in the region. As the war dragged on, the backlash against napalm intensified, both in Vietnam and internationally. Anti-war protests in the US and around the world often featured graphic images of napalm victims, drawing attention to the immense suffering it caused. Protesters decried napalm as a weapon of terror, not just of war, and its use became a key point of criticism in the broader debate over the US involvement in Vietnam. This public outcry put pressure on the US government to rethink its use of incendiary weapons, though napalm continued to be deployed throughout much of the conflict. The military, for its part, maintained that napalm was a necessary tool in a brutal and unconventional war. US officials argued that its use saved American lives by forcing enemy forces into the open, where they could be more easily targeted. Furthermore, they asserted that napalm was effective in clearing out vast areas of dense jungle, a crucial tactic in the fight against an enemy that thrived in such environments. Yet these justifications did little to stem the tide of criticism. By the late 1960s, napalm had become synonymous with the brutality of the Vietnam War, overshadowing any strategic advantage it may have provided. In the aftermath of the war, the debate over napalm's use in Vietnam left deep scars on the global conscience. The conflict had exposed the limitations of traditional military thinking in a war where civilian casualties were not merely collateral damage but a central issue. Napalm's destructive power, while tactically advantageous, had proven to be a double-edged sword, one that inflicted immense human suffering and tarnished the reputation of those who used it. The controversy surrounding napalm in Vietnam would play a key role in shaping future international laws and discussions on the ethical use of incendiary weapons in warfare. As the war came to an end, napalm's legacy in Vietnam remained one of devastation and controversy. The haunting images of burning villages and maimed children continued to resonate long after the last bombs had fallen. For many, napalm represented the moral costs of modern warfare, a weapon whose tactical success could never justify the human toll it exacted. This complex and troubled history would forever mark the Vietnam War, cementing napalm's place in the annals of both military history and ethical debate. The effectiveness of napalm as a weapon stems from its unique chemical properties, which make it a terrifyingly potent incendiary device. While the concept of fire as a weapon is ancient, napalm revolutionized the battlefield by enhancing the duration, spread, and intensity of flames in ways that traditional firebombs could not. In this chapter, we will explore the chemistry behind napalm, its composition, how it works, and why it has been such an effective but controversial tool of war. At its core, napalm is a gelled fuel that adheres to surfaces and burns at extremely high temperatures. The original formulation, developed during World War II, combined naphthenic and palmitic acids with gasoline to create a sticky, flammable gel. Unlike liquid gasoline, which evaporates and burns quickly, napalm's thickened consistency allows it to stick to surfaces, whether they be buildings, trees, or people, and burn for extended periods. This quality makes it particularly devastating when used against enemy troops or in urban areas, as the flames are not easily extinguished by water or traditional firefighting methods. One of the most significant advantages of napalm is its ability to burn at temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 815 degrees Celsius. At this level of heat, nearly everything it touches is either incinerated or severely damaged. The gel-like consistency ensures that napalm spreads across surfaces, creating a wide area of destruction. When dropped from planes in bombs, napalm could cover large swaths of jungle or urban environments, igniting not only structures but also the vegetation around them. The fire spreads quickly, consuming oxygen in the immediate area, creating suffocating heat that can kill even those not directly in the path of the flames. The science behind napalm's devastating impact lies in the chemical reaction that occurs when it is ignited. Upon deployment, the bomb releases the gel, which spreads across the target area. The burning process is fueled by the oxygen in the air, and because napalm clings to surfaces, the fire continues to burn intensely as long as there is fuel and oxygen. This continuous burning makes napalm particularly effective in areas where enemy forces are entrenched, as the flames penetrate underground bunkers, tunnels, and fortified positions, forcing the enemy into the open. Another characteristic that makes napalm especially feared is its adhesiveness. Once ignited, the gel sticks to whatever it lands on, including human skin. Victims of napalm attacks often experience horrific burns because the gel is difficult to remove once it has ignited. Unlike other incendiary weapons, where the flames may be quickly extinguished, napalm continues to burn, and even attempts to smother the fire with blankets or water can exacerbate the damage. The chemical makeup ensures that napalm sticks to the skin and continues to burn, causing deep, life-threatening burns that often lead to death or permanent disfigurement. Despite the effectiveness of the original formulation, the US military continued to improve napalm in the years following World War II. The development of Napalm-B, a more advanced version of the incendiary material, took place during the Korean War and was later widely used in Vietnam. Napalm-B is a mixture of polystyrene, benzene, and gasoline, which created an even stickier and more effective gel. Unlike the original formula, Napalm-B burned hotter, longer, and was more difficult to extinguish. The military favored it for its increased lethality and ability to ignite even when dropped in less than ideal weather conditions, such as during monsoon rains or in humid tropical environments. Napalm's ability to burn longer than traditional explosives also gave it a psychological edge. On the battlefield, the sight of napalm engulfing an area in flames had a demoralizing effect on enemy troops. The sheer intensity of the firestorm, combined with the sticky, clinging gel that continued to burn even after attempts to extinguish it, caused widespread panic among those targeted. For both soldiers and civilians, the knowledge that napalm could be used at any moment, leaving no shelter safe from its destructive path, heightened the fear and chaos of war. However, the very same properties that made napalm an effective weapon also led to widespread condemnation. The indiscriminate nature of its destruction meant that civilians often suffered as much as combatants. As napalm was used in densely populated areas, the lines between military targets and civilian casualties blurred. The devastating burns inflicted by napalm, the fires that destroyed homes, and the long-term environmental damage made its use a point of contention in the global community. Ultimately, the science behind napalm's efficiency as an incendiary weapon reveals a brutal calculus. It was designed to destroy, demoralize, and devastate. But the same attributes that made it a fearsome tool in battle also underscored the ethical dilemmas surrounding its use in modern warfare. The development of napalm may have been rooted in scientific innovation, but its lasting impact is a reminder of the human cost of such advancements in military technology. As the devastating effects of napalm became widely known during the Vietnam War, it quickly became one of the most controversial weapons in the world. The images of villages engulfed in flames and civilians, including children, suffering from horrific burns caused a global outcry. Napalm came to symbolize the brutal excesses of modern warfare, leading to widespread calls for its ban. This chapter explores the international response to napalm's use, the ethical debates it sparked, and the steps taken to regulate or restrict its deployment under international law. The use of napalm in Vietnam was instrumental in shaping global perceptions of the war. For many, it epitomized the inhumanity of war and raised serious moral and ethical questions about the conduct of the US military. News reports, graphic images, and first-hand accounts of napalm's effects on civilians created an intense backlash, particularly among anti-war activists. The iconic photograph of Phan Thi Kim Phuc, showing a young girl fleeing a napalm attack, became a potent symbol of the war's indiscriminate destruction and galvanized the anti-war movement in the US and around the world. The moral outcry against napalm was not limited to its effects on civilians. Many argued that its use violated the principles of just war theory, particularly the concepts of proportionality and discrimination. Proportionality refers to the idea that the harm caused by a military action must be proportionate to the military advantage gained. Given napalm's ability to cause widespread destruction and suffering, critics questioned whether its use could ever be justified under this principle. Discrimination, on the other hand, mandates that combatants must distinguish between military targets and non-combatants. In practice, napalm often failed to make this distinction, burning everything in its path, including civilians and non-military infrastructure. As the war in Vietnam dragged on and public opposition to the US military's tactics grew, napalm became a focal point for international condemnation. Protests erupted in cities around the world, with demonstrators calling for an end to the war and a ban on napalm. The weapon's use in civilian areas became a key argument in the broader debate over war crimes and human rights. Organizations like Amnesty International and the Red Cross issued statements condemning the use of napalm, arguing that its effects were too cruel to be justified, regardless of the tactical situation. The controversy surrounding napalm eventually led to discussions about its place under international law. Although there was no specific prohibition on the use of napalm at the time, the Geneva Conventions and other treaties governing the conduct of war provided a framework for regulating its use. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, 1949, which focuses on the protection of civilians during times of war, the use of weapons that cause unnecessary suffering or indiscriminate harm is prohibited. Many legal scholars and human rights advocates argued that napalm fell into this category. In response to growing public pressure and the evolving standards of international law, the United Nations began to take action. In 1980, the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, CCW, was adopted, aimed at restricting or banning weapons deemed to cause excessive suffering or to be indiscriminate. Protocol 3 of the CCW specifically addressed incendiary weapons like napalm, prohibiting their use against civilians and limiting their deployment in areas with concentrations of civilians. Although the US did not initially ratify the protocol, it represented a significant step toward the regulation of incendiary weapons under international law. Despite these legal developments, the legacy of napalm continues to be a point of debate. While many countries have moved away from its use, some military forces still maintain it in their arsenals, arguing that it is a necessary tool in certain combat situations. However, the ethical and legal questions surrounding its deployment remain unresolved. The international community continues to grapple with the balance between military necessity and humanitarian concerns, and napalm remains a potent symbol of the enduring challenges of regulating warfare in the modern age. The story of napalm is not just one of military innovation, but also of profound ethical dilemmas and public reckoning. Decades after its first deployment, napalm's legacy continues to resonate in discussions about warfare, morality, and the limits of human ingenuity. In this final chapter, we explore how napalm's impact extends beyond the battlefield, shaping the way societies think about the ethics of war, the development of new weapons, and the importance of memory in shaping future conflicts. Napalm's enduring legacy is deeply intertwined with the way it was used during the Vietnam War. For many, it came to symbolize the excesses of US military power and the human cost of modern warfare. The iconic images of civilians suffering from napalm burns, particularly those of children, left an indelible mark on the global consciousness. These images helped galvanize the anti-war movement, contributing to a shift in public opinion and fueling calls for an end to the conflict. Napalm became a flashpoint in the broader debate about the morality of the war, with critics arguing that its use constituted a form of indiscriminate violence that violated basic principles of humanity. The ethical questions raised by napalm continue to shape discussions about the development and use of new weapons. As military technology advances, the challenge of balancing military necessity with humanitarian concerns becomes more pressing. Napalm's legacy serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us that the pursuit of military advantage can come at a devastating human cost. The debates that surrounded napalm's use in Vietnam have since resurfaced in discussions about the use of drones, chemical weapons, and other controversial technologies. Napalm's legacy also highlights the importance of memory in shaping the way societies respond to war. The Vietnam War, and the role napalm played in it, continues to be a subject of intense historical and cultural examination. Films, books, and documentaries have explored the impact of napalm on the war, its victims, and the soldiers who used it. The weapon's portrayal in popular culture has contributed to a broader understanding of the ethical complexities of warfare, but it has also risked simplifying the narrative, reducing napalm to a symbol of American aggression rather than a multifaceted tool of war. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the need to memorialize the victims of napalm and to confront the painful legacy of its use. In Vietnam, survivors of napalm attacks continue to live with the physical and emotional scars of the war. For these individuals, the legacy of napalm is not just a matter of history but an ongoing reality. Efforts to provide medical care, compensation, and recognition to these victims have been slow and inconsistent, but they represent an important step toward acknowledging the full human cost of napalm. Ultimately, the legacy of napalm forces us to confront difficult questions about the ethics of war and the responsibilities of those who wield power. While the development of napalm was a product of its time, its impact continues to shape the way we think about the relationship between technology, violence, and humanity. As new weapons are developed and deployed, the lessons of napalm remind us that the choices we make in war have long-lasting consequences, not only for those who fight but for the generations that follow.